Hi, welcome to the first video from Information First for 2020. In this video, what? You're kidding me. Where did the time go? Apparently, it's 2021. All kidding aside, welcome to the first video from Information First in a while. I know we didn't get too many videos out in the second half of 2020, so we're looking forward to starting a whole new video series this year and with regular video updates. That being said, this is the first video of 2021, and we have two announcements we want to make quickly. The first one is we are expanding into Canada. We are fully able now to sell and resell software licenses and services in Canada, so we're looking forward to meeting a whole bunch of new Canadian customers. We can be reached, of course, at our website, www.info-first.com, LinkedIn, Facebook, and of course, since you're watching, YouTube. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe for future video updates and like the video. And of course, in the comments, by all means, please post any recommendations or suggestions for future videos. We're always looking for content ideas. That being said, the video is using the new YouTube, or does utilize the YouTube chapter section. So by all means, you can click on any of the chapters either in the table of contents or in the timeline below. You'll see a little timeline bar. It should be broken into chapters, so you can skip this introduction if you want and jump right into the good stuff, which brings us to the point of the video, is to talk about jurisdictions.
Hey, I'm just doing my job. You give me that juris my diction crap.
That's right. Jurisdictions are a legal entity that has the ability to compel an organization to retain records in a particular manner. In layman's terms, different countries may have different timeline requirements on the same retention schedule. Let's take, for example, an administrative schedule. In America, those documents need to be kept for 2 years. In Canada, they need to be kept for 3. And in Australia, they need to be kept for 1. We can have one retention schedule with 3 different triggers based on country. Jurisdictions are typically associated with countries. They could also be associated with states or possibly even departments. We could have one retention schedule with different timelines on different departments. All of that can be set and configured by using the Jurisdictions module in Content Manager. All right, let's get started and see how it all comes together. The first thing I do have to point out is that the Jurisdictions is a paid feature. You do need to be licensed for it, and if you are licensed for it, you need to enable it. Enabling Jurisdictions is as easy as going to the Administration tab, clicking on the System Options button, and scrolling down until you see Jurisdictions, multiple jurisdictions, and putting a check mark there. Click OK to save your changes, and now you've enabled Jurisdictions. Now, Jurisdictions enter the product in a variety of locations. First and foremost, you must establish your jurisdictions. They can be set up in the Manage tab, under the Jurisdictions button, and you can see I've already preset 3 countries: United States, Canada, and Australia. Once you've established your countries, you can now utilize them in various parts of the program. The most common use, or the most important usage, I should say, is to utilize jurisdictions in retention schedules. I've already gone ahead and created a retention schedule, so let me go and grab my favorites. Jurisdiction, and we'll take a look at this general administrative documents. In this case, you can see by the action summary, I have 3 different triggers. I have the default if there is no jurisdiction, which says basically destroy this document 2 years after it was created. However, if this document was created or is deemed in the Canadian jurisdiction, we are going to destroy it 1 year after it's created. And if it's deemed in the Australian jurisdiction, we're going to destroy it 3 years after it's date created. One schedule, 3 triggers based on country. Now that we've established jurisdictions and we've set them up in the retention schedules, or at least assign them to schedules, where can we put jurisdictions in the product? Content Manager has a certain order in which it looks for jurisdictions. First, it searches in the category or classification. If it's not found by the category or classification, it will then look for it will then look at the record type, if there's any default on the record type. If it doesn't find a retention on the record type, it will then look at the creator, or the user who's creating the record, if they have a jurisdiction set. And if it's not set on the user, then it will check the user's organization or default organization. So any of those 4 locations, if there is a jurisdiction, the document will incorporate that particular jurisdiction. Of course, it is in a priority order. Category first, default record type second, user third, and user's organization fourth. As soon as it finds one, that's the one that we'll use. So let's see how this all comes together. Setting them up, as I said, in the classifications, you're going to access the jurisdictions in the, let me go into this one here. You're going to access that right on the general page. We can see the default jurisdiction here. That's our categories. On our record type, I'm going to grab a particular record type. You can set it on the governance tab. Why can't I find governance? Oh, sorry. Governance is the organization. It's on the default tab for a record type. You can see it right here. Default jurisdiction by record type. As I said, for a user, I'm going to go to my users. Here's Pat End User. Currently, Pat End User has no jurisdiction, but I'm going to go to their governance tab and you can see no jurisdiction on Pat. But what's important with Pat is they are a member of the Canadian Administration Organization, which I have set a default country as Canada. So we've got the jurisdiction set various locations. Let's see how it all kind of comes together. I'm going to log on the system as Pat End User, red for the Canadian employee, and I'm going to start by creating my first record. New, document, click OK, and I'm going to say welcome to 2021. Now, notice it did pick up the default jurisdiction. That comes from the Admin Canada group. We saw earlier that Pat End User has no default jurisdiction, but the organization Pat is in does. So it's going to default to Canada, and I'm going to just simply click OK, but I have to give it a container first. So I do have a jurisdiction demo folder. I'll put it in and click OK. This document gets saved. The jurisdiction is Canada, and we'll take a look at the retention schedules in a moment. Now, let's, as an administrator, change Pat. We'll do two changes. Number one, I'm going to make Pat Canadian. So I'm going to go into Pat's I'm just thinking what someone on staff might have think if I literally made them Canadian. That would be kind of funny. Anyways, that being said, let's go to the governance tab, and I'm going to now make Pat End User a Canadian. So now Pat is Canadian, but I'm also going to do something to Pat. I'm going to put them in the Australian office. They're on a leave of absence or a work trade relationship with the Australian office. So I'm going to go into their associations, and I'm going to remove from Canada, and I'm going to add them to the Australian company or the Australian organization and click OK. So what we have now is we have a user who is a Canadian. We have their organization, which is Australian. Let's see what happens with Content Manager. I'm going to go back as Pat. And just to be safe, I'm going to do a little reload. So we get all the new information for Pat. I'm going to close this particular record off. I'll close them all off. And let's go and create a new record. It'd be a document. Click OK. And it picks up CA, even though Pat is in the Australian office. And that's because in the order of looking for jurisdictions, Content Manager found it on the user's default, not the user's organization. So I'm going to put here Canadian working down under. Click OK. I'll put it in the same folder and click OK. All right, so there we've seen two examples. One uses the user. The second one still uses the user even though they're in a different department. So what I could potentially do now, if I go back to my Pat End User. Oh, not this one. That's an old one. That's for another video. Let me go back to Pat End User. I'll take them out of Australia. Oh, actually, what I'll do is I will remove them from Canada. There we go. Okay, and just one more time to show you what happens now. If I go to create the record, you see it's picked up the Australian because that was, because now, there. So now by creating this record, when I've removed the jurisdiction from the user, it defaults to the user's organization, which is set to be Australian. I'll go ahead and save that record. And now we've got 3. All right, so let's look at some other examples on where else Content Manager would potentially pick up the jurisdiction. So here I'm on as administrator. And just to show you the properties of the administrator, I'm going to click on myself. I'm going to go to the governance tab, and you can see the administrator has no default jurisdiction. I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to create a new record. And I'm going to say no jurisdiction. Like that. I'm going to put it in the same folder we've all been using, which is 21.1. All right. Oops. Double click there. Notice no jurisdiction, no retention schedule, no classification. I'll click OK, and the record gets created. And what I'll do is I'll bring up the metadata here, and you can kind of see some things. in terms of what it picked up. So it has no retention schedule. I didn't assign one. It has no jurisdiction. That's kind of the worst case example of creating a new record. I'll do it one more time. Create a new record. I'm going to put retention only, like that. I'll put it in the same folder, 21.1. And this time I will set a retention schedule. So I'll go ahead and grab my jurisdiction, general documents, and click OK. So here it gets created. At least it picks up the retention schedule, but you can see it's using the default, which is no country, which is 2 years. You can confirm that by the date due to be destroyed is in 2 years on 2023. Let's do it another time, and this time I'm going to classify the document. Remember, classification is the first location where Content Manager looks to get a jurisdiction. Click New, click Record, click OK, and what I'm going to do is with class, like that, put it in the folder. And here, next thing I'm going to do is grab a classification. So I'm going to browse around to my training classification. I'm going to grab my jurisdiction. Now, in this case, the default jurisdiction for this classification is Australia, even though this particular user has no jurisdiction. Click OK. You can see it populates the jurisdiction, and it also grabbed the retention schedule. That's because I associated the retention schedule with the classification. Click OK and save that one. And we can see now that it picks up a different jurisdiction, and it's for 3 years, which is 2024. So there you've seen it come from the classification, you've seen it come from the user's organization. Now with all of that, you might be asking, well, what if the document is on multiple jurisdictions? That's a great question. What it will do then is Content Manager will then pick the most severe. I'm going to go back to this one that I created a few seconds ago, which has no jurisdiction. And what I'm going to do is add both Canada and Australia. So as an administrator, I'm going to right click on the record. I'm going to go into the administrative tools and add jurisdiction. Now, as an FYI, this is exposed on the form, so I can also go into the properties of the record and adjust the jurisdictions. If I want to do that, click the magnifying glass. I'm going to grab all 3 jurisdictions and click OK. So I put it in Canada, I put it in the US, and I put it in Australia. What's interesting is the US doesn't have a trigger. The triggers were only based on Canada or Australia. So we'll see what happens. Click OK. Now you can see I have 3 jurisdictions on this particular record. I'm going to click OK. And you can see all 3 jurisdictions get listed. It is an Australian, a Canadian, and an American document. It sounds like the punchline to a joke or a setup to a joke. But that being said, you can see the retention schedule, and it's going to follow the most severe, which appears to be Australia, keeping for 3 years. And sure enough, if we look at the disposal date, it's 2024. So if you have multiple jurisdictions, Content Manager will find the most severe, and that's the one that will take precedence. Just to show you that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove Australia from the jurisdiction and click OK. And you can see it now takes the most severe, which is 2 years, which is that 2 years? Yes, it is. So we have Canada and we have the US. So remember, the United States did not have a specific country-based trigger, which means it defaults to the default, which was 2 years, and the Canadian retention is 1 year. So therefore, that's a long way of me saying the 2-year retention schedule is maintained. So I think that's it for retention schedules. I mean, I could keep doing example after example, but that would get kind of boring. The key takeaways here is retention schedules, let me say that again. The key takeaway here is that jurisdictions are a paid feature, a licensed feature that needs to be enabled. Once enabled, you're going to set your jurisdictions up through the jurisdictions in the Manage tab. Once you have jurisdictions, you can then apply them to things. Most likely, you want to apply them to retention schedules. That was the whole point of doing it. And then you can associate it to either categories, classifications, record types, users, and organizations. Once that's all been done, records that are created the retention will be based on the jurisdiction to which they belong. And of course, and I didn't even talk about this, of course, you can, like I have done in my demo, let me open up my end user again. You can, if you want, on this particular form, also expose the jurisdiction as a field for the user to populate at the time of creation. But of course, with all things Content Manager, the more automated, the more default you make it, the easier it is for your user base. All right, so thanks for watching. If you like this video, give us a like. If you want future content, don't forget to subscribe. And On my right, you're going to see a link to our most recent videos. And on the left, you're going to see a link to the Content Manager playlist. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.